So I'm here today with George Grubbs III. George, thanks for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it. George is my client. George has 7 dealerships in Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, and Tulsa. And I'm grateful for his business. Obviously, we've done a lot of properties together, automotive properties. And I want to touch on some of those. We've done some other non-automotive as well. But I always talk about relationship, and relationships are very important. But my perspective of the relationship is obviously different than the client. And so I'd like to hear from George what his thoughts are on what he likes, what I bring to the table, if you will, as far as a broker. Obviously, my background is automotive. I look at the municipalities, what the laws are, what the restrictions are. The Texas Motor Vehicle Division comes into play because franchise dealers have to be very careful about where they go. They have protected trade areas. But all of those things said, at the end of the day, you have to have a good relationship with your client. And George and I have an excellent relationship. Thank you for that, George. Please tell us a little bit about your opinion of me as a broker. Be careful. And, about your businesses. You've got great accolades from all the manufacturers. You have an unbelievable reputation in the industry.
Thank you.
I really salute that. It's not easy today to really win the hearts and minds of your clients, and you've successfully done that year after year. My hat's off to you.
Thank you. You mentioned relationship, and relationship in our business is extremely important as well. We're actually celebrating our 75th year in the business. I'm 4th generation in the business, and
congratulations.
Carrying on the family legacy, so that's been a lot of fun.
Sure.
And we couldn't have stayed in business that long without good relationships in the community. Not just with clients, but also vendors like yourself that help us grow and continue to service everybody. I think back to when I first got in the business, and my dad, my grandfather, my uncle, my aunt, basically the whole family was in the business, and building those relationships in the community was extremely important. As different family members retired and got out of the business, it came to me to carry that mantle. And my goal has been to not only maintain, but to grow. Mm-hmm. And growth has come through new points, we call them open points, and new additions into the market. And along with that, we have to find real estate, and we have to make good decisions on where that location is going to be, and because that's a big investment that we're building with these big buildings. And so we're making long-term commitments, and we just want to make sure that we're accessible and convenient for our customers. It's been fun to grow. I would say the last 8 years or so, we've grown tremendously and added a handful of stores. And actually, if you think about 9 years ago, we had 1 store, and here we are with 7 stores now. So a tremendous amount of growth in the past 8 years. And you've been instrumental in helping me do that. So that's been a fun thing to know that you, a car guy, understand my needs. And it's been good dialogue that we've had over those years. And that relationship has been extremely important.
Thank you, George. I appreciate that. When we think back about the deals, and it's when you're going into major markets, which you're in major markets, the challenge really is not only finding the zoning, finding the appropriate piece of land or an existing building. When we were searching in San Antonio for a piece of land, an additional piece of land, we wanted a close proximity to the dealership. It was really hard for us to find that property and then negotiate with the owner and try and get all that done. We actually had to lease a place temporarily for the parking.
Right.
And again, we had to fight with the city and make sure that the use was going to be approved and what have you. And then more recently, or I don't know what the timeline was, but Houston, we had a designated area in Houston. That was incredible. Right. And this goes back to a relationship too, not only with your client, but with other brokers. There was a designated trade area. It was a very tight trade area.
2 miles.
Yeah, 2-mile radius. So where the existing store was, we had to be within 2 miles of that. And it was a very in-demand area. We couldn't find anything. And I was down there, George, I'm pulling my hair out. I can't find it. So as luck would have it, there was an old building, an old brick factory, I think, an Acme brick building. Yep. And it was not on market. It was an off-market property, or it had just been bought by a developer. And so I found a broker in Houston that worked that area. I contacted the broker, and I said, hey, I'm at a loss here. I need some help. He knew about the building. He called the developer that was his client said, hey, I've got a great buyer or tenant, if you will, that wants to get this building. This is what they don't want to do with it. And this guy wanted to get the building and wanted to refurbish it because it was a very hot area. And he had done something right next to it, a conversion, turning it into offices, if you will. Beautiful, beautiful development. Anyway, long story short, I co-brokered with a local dealer, local broker in Houston who had a developer. Both were wonderful to work with. And he ended up with Volvo of Houston, which is in a lovely historical building that you spent a lot of money on refurbishing and bringing up to Volvo standards. And that took thinking outside the box, if you will. It took a lot of other team members, if you will, to put that together.
It did.
But that's a great example of going the extra mile and looking at things differently. You've heard me talk about think different about real estate. Not only do you have to think different, but you have to act different.
Remember, we were looking at different sites, and like you said, very in-demand area. And the prices that we were finding were a little ridiculous. But you did find a piece of property that I think was across the street, if I remember right. Wasn't the right shape, maybe a little bit smaller than what I was wanting. But we had that option of, do we build from the ground up or do we refurbish this building? And at the end of the day, the deal that you were able to negotiate on my behalf was just such a tremendous deal. It made way more sense for me to move into that building and remodel it. It's actually worked out really well. The clients that we have down there love the idea of remodeling and taking this building that's an old building and putting some more modern facade on it, but keeping a lot of the original. And so it's turned out to be a really neat project.
I love projects like that, and it was a great find. So I think that's one of the things. I'm curious, George, I know you've got every one of your facilities, like every car dealer, is different. And in the traditional sense of a car dealership, you have all the different departments under one roof. The variable ops, which as we know is sales, and the fixed operations, which are service, parts, and body shop. But now, because land is more expensive and because there's less land available in the urban markets, even in some of the markets like this, where your zoning restricts you, or there's just not any land for sale, you have to look at split facilities. Variable ops at one location, split ops at another. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think you can still have synergies? I know it takes more personnel. It's not the ideal situation, but...
Yeah, it's not ideal. Obviously less efficient when you're splitting personnel up and you're having to shuttle vehicles back and forth. We looked at that in San Antonio when we found that off-site property. We looked at possibly moving some of our fixed operations over to that new site so that I would have more land for the variable side. In the end, we didn't, because we ended up having to lease that land. I think if I would have been able to purchase land, I probably would have moved variable off-site, or I mean fixed off-site. But I've seen it done. I have a lot of friends in the business that they have no choice, and so they've separated some of their operations. And yeah, you can make it work. I think we're obviously trying to grow, and each individual store is trying to grow, and sometimes you outgrow your facility and you have to get really creative. And we're always looking at that and trying to figure out what makes the most sense at any given time. And I'm always calling you saying, hey, Bill, what do you think about this? Hey, Bill, can you look for that for me? Hey, what about that? And I think we're just always trying to stay ahead of it.
And that's the fun part too. When you have a broker and a client and you have the trust and they understand your business, it's fun to have the dialogue. And I always encourage all my prospects to call me anytime, because really you need someone to help you think through it. A lot of times your employees, they'll say, oh, sure, George, whatever you want to do. But when somebody that you understands your business and says, yeah, that's a great idea, but, or you get someone who can bounce ideas off of, I like that. And we've really enjoyed that in our relationship. I appreciate the trust. I appreciate the confidence. That doesn't mean we don't have disagreements and we don't say, yeah, but this is the way I look at it, or thanks, but no thanks. So that's part of the fun.
And it really comes down to the zoning piece of it for me specifically is I may say, hey, Bill, I need to be in this area. and you go do the legwork for me, and you find out the zoning, and you go talk to the city and have those conversations for me even before we've even landed on a piece of property. That's always very helpful because you can run that way ahead of me making a decision, and so it helps when it's time to make that decision.
Thank you. That's why I earn the big bucks, George.
That's right.
Speaking of that, I know we're constantly looking at growth. And in the state of Texas, the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles dictates a lot to franchise new car dealers. You have a protected area, a trade area, if you will. There's more and more advertising. There's more brands coming to the market. Everybody wants to be in the United States, and everybody wants to be in Texas, and everybody wants to be in the major markets.
Right.
So when you have a name and a brand that, like you've grown, the Grubbs family name, you want to do what you can to become a first consideration when people are looking to buy a car. Hey, I've got to go shop Grubbs because I know they've got a variety of franchises. I know they've got a great reputation. This is what I want to do. So when you look at the markets you're not in, where there's a concentration of other dealers, and staying within the laws of the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles, what are some strategies you can use to build your brand? Obviously, the way we used to do it is to put billboards up.
Sure.
And advertise in that way, but I know there's obviously a lot of different mediums now, and you can't just paint your name on the side of a building. You could, but most people don't do that. Is there, looking out, is there a reason for you to consider a satellite location or a service drop-off point? We had talked about this before, and I think it's an interesting concept to have, hey, you bought a Grubbs product and you're in Saxe or you're in North Fort Worth, and here's a drop-off point. And this also came to conversation from some dealer friends of mine that during COVID, we couldn't get used cars.
Right.
Because there were no new cars being produced and used cars were selling like crazy. And so dealers were scrambling saying, how can I get more used cars?
Yeah.
And I had a couple of dealers call me and say, hey, Bill, can we lease a little gas station somewhere and say Grubbs free appraisals and drive our car in there? So those are some interesting concepts. And I don't know if that's worth talking about, but you know, that every car dealer wants to expand their footprint, if you will.
Absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
We've actually looked at that many times, and the drop-off locations seem to be what our clients are most interested in. I don't know that we necessarily need to build another full-service center or even a dealership or even a sales point in different parts of town, because you buy a car once every 3 to 5 years, but you're servicing it 2, 3, 4 times a year. So it's really more about the service side. And so if there was a drop-off location or even a location that could do quick service. And if there was more involved service that was necessary, then it gets shuttled to the main facility. I know we've talked about that before, and we've looked at that quite a bit. We've just never pulled the trigger on it. I think what we've done is an in-between step where we just do pick-up and drop-off. And we've been doing that for 15 years.
Which is great.
That was way before COVID that we were doing that, and it worked well for us. In fact, when we were located just a few miles south of here, most of our clientele base was here in northeast Tarrant County. And we were doing a lot of pickup and drop off in this part of town. And that seemed to work for us and brand us really well and allowed us to grow in this part of the market. So I think that manufacturers are a little hesitant to do satellite centers. And if it's something that we did on our own that's non-franchised, then that can make a lot of sense.
Sure.
And I think that as this market grows, as some of these other metros that we're in grow, it's probably going to be more and more important that we're able to reach all of those consumers. You look at Houston, it's a big market, and it takes a long time to get from one part of town to the other part of town. And I know if I lived there, I think I would want something that was convenient.
We're getting almost as bad as Houston, George. Dallas, Fort Worth is getting hard to travel around in.
It sure is.
So anyway, we've got to continue to look at that. In that vein, our business, the automobile business, has in many ways stayed the same for generations, right? You have a dealership, you have product, people come look at the product, they drive the product and negotiate, you come to terms and they buy it and leave and bring it back there for servicing. EVs, electric vehicles, have made a big dent, if you will, excuse the pun, on the automobile business. Great. I think it's more environmentally friendly. Obviously, there are some challenges with EV, the charging stations and what have you. I think that's being addressed and will continue to grow over time. But what do you see looking out 5 or 10 or 15 years in the automobile business? We've talked about the distribution of products, that the manufacturer may bring distribution hubs closer to the major metros, or somehow try and change the role of the franchise dealer. But from a consumer standpoint, do you see any other changes on the horizon that would impact the relationship between a shopper and a seller?
It's interesting because, like you said, things in our industry don't really change, and lots of things that are tried end up coming back around and someone tries it again later. And I think that it was probably back in the mid-90s, the manufacturers tried to get heavily involved in the retail side of the business, and then they got out of it. And here they are getting back, or at least trying to get back into it. And I don't think that's going to stick, just like it hasn't ever previously, because what it comes down to is that relationship. And our stores, all these car dealers, are very involved in the community. We support a lot of the schools and the sports, and our employees live here, they shop here, they eat here. So I think that it's extremely important that franchise model stays solid and that the manufacturers don't get too involved. I am a fan of more options, not just internal combustion, but hybrid and full electric. I'm a fan of lots of options, I think, because one thing for everybody isn't a good idea. Let's have some choices. But I think what the manufacturers are still trying to figure that balance out. And again, they've talked about doing these distribution centers. If they do, that means that those cars are sitting on their books longer. They like to get those cars off their books and onto my books. Again, I think that's going to continue to evolve and probably go back to very similar to what it's always been, which in my mind is a good thing. People were saying you don't need these big buildings anymore, you don't need these big parking lots anymore. I don't think that's true. I think we're still going to need a place where people can transact, people feel comfortable coming. They know their salesperson, they know their service advisor, they know the name on the building as somebody who's here and cares about the community. I really don't think that any of that's going to change. And again, you look at this giant parking lot we have outside with all those choices of vehicles. And somebody, yes, you can look online and you can get an idea of maybe a few of the products that we offer, but it's not until you're here physical, you're touching it, feeling it, driving it, that you get an idea for something that maybe you didn't think of until you see it, or maybe it just makes you like it that much more because you see it in person. So I really don't think a whole lot's going to change over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
I think you're right. I came in today and saw some of the new Acura models, and they're beautiful. And you're right, George. You and I have seen a lot of online car selling companies, big ones, come and go because, you can buy stuff online. We order stuff online, clothes, and it comes in and it doesn't fit, or you don't like it, or the color's not right, and you return it. And so that's a $50 or $100 product, and buying a $20,000 to $50,000 product is a little bit different. I think you're right. I think the biggest change I've seen is warehouse operations for big used cars. To me, that makes sense because you've got an enclosed area that can be air conditioned. It's safe, the cars stay clean, and it's like a big showroom.
Right.
So that's one of the things that we've seen coming in, but the cost of warehouses now has gotten so expensive that now dealers are going, I might as well just build a facility that's a full service facility that has service, parts, body shop, and sales, so I can, offer more to my clients. So I really appreciate the time today. It's been great, George. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be your broker, and I look forward to doing a lot more in the years ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Phil. Appreciate everything.
Thank you, George.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yeah.